Welcome back to Wild Robot, our read aloud, and we are on chapter 51 today, The Autumn. So we haven't read for a little while, so we're going to go back a few pages just to remind ourselves what was happening. So the button, that's right, Bright Bill, he clicked the button on the back of Roz's head and she fell asleep or she shut down. And he was so worried that she wouldn't be the same, but luckily everything worked out and she came back just the same. So he was so happy to see her and have her back. Now we are on chapter 51, The Autumn. And we know autumn is a synonym for fall. The days are getting shorter, the air was getting crispier, and one morning, Roz walked out to find a layer of frost in the garden. Autumn had come to the island. The tree leaves, which had been green for the robot's entire life, turned yellow and orange and red. They let go of their branches and floated down to the ground. And the forest gradually filled with the sounds of creatures scurrying through dead leaves. Tree nuts were also falling, thunking onto roots and rocks, and occasionally clinging on the robot. The smell of flowers faded as blooms withered. All the rich scents and colors of the islands were draining away. The animals were also changing. Furry animals were growing more fur. Feathery animals were growing more feathers. Scaly animals were starting to look for new homes. "Erp, it's cooling off," croaked one of the frogs. "Before long, it'll be time for sleeping." "Erp, I better start looking for a good hole," croaked the second frog. "Have you found one yet?" "Nah," croaked the first frog. "I'll look for a hole next week. For now, I'm going to enjoy the warm sunlight while it lasts." Erp. Many of the island animals were already thinking about their winter hibernation. Frogs, bees, snakes, and even bears would soon disappear and spend the next few months resting out of sight. And then there were the birds. Some birds, like owls and woodpeckers, would spend the winter nesting and eating the island's few remaining edibles. But the migratory birds were preparing for a long journey south to their warm wintering grounds. And among those birds destined to leave were geese. Now I want you to think, why would this be a problem for Roz and Brightbill? Brightbill, he's a goose. And so he has to migrate to survive the winter. Chapter 52, The Flock. Brightbill slowly waddled into the nest. He had a confused look on his face. "Mama, the other gooselings said we have to leave the island soon, and we won't return for months and months. Is that true?" "That is true," said Roz. "You know the geese migrate south for the winter." "Will you migrate with us?" said Brightbill. "I cannot fly nor swim, so I will spend the winter here on the island." "Can I stay with you?" "I do not think that's a good idea. I think you should migrate with the flock." How long will the migration take?" said Brightbill. "Where will we fly? When will we come home?" "I do not know," said Roz. "Let us go ask the others." And the robot and the gooseling walked around the pond to where Loudwing and her friends were chatting. "Hello, everyone," said Roz. "Brightbill has some questions about the flock's coming up migration." "And we'd be happy to answer them," said Loudwing. "What would you like to know, little one?" "How long will the migration take?" said Brightbill. "Where will we fly? When will we come home?" "It'll take us a couple weeks to fly south," said Loudwing, "depending on the weather. We'll join other flocks at Beautiful Lake in the middle of the great sprawling field," said another goose. "And we'll come back to the island after 4 or 5 months," said someone else, "depending on the weather." As soon as they walked back to the nest, Brightbill said to his mother, "Lately, I've been feeling this strong urge to fly, not just around the pond or the island, but to go on a long flight, a journey." "Those are your instincts," said the robot. "All animals have instincts. They help you to survive." "Do you have instincts?" said the gooseling. "I do have instincts. They help me survive also. My instincts are definitely telling me to fly south for the winter," said Brightbill. "I just wish you could join us. I'm going to worry about you while I'm away." "Oh, do not worry. I will be fine," said Roz. "How bad could winter be?" Has Roz ever experienced a winter before? No. So she doesn't know if the island's going to have lots of snow or frost. Like, she doesn't have any warm clothes. Like, how is she going to survive in the winter? Let's see. Chapter 53, The Migration. It was the night before the migration, and Brightbill was sleeping fitfully. Roz watched him toss and turn until he finally crawled up into her arms, and she rocked him to sleep, just like the old days. Early the next morning, Brightbill waddled outside and looked at the pond. The water was perfectly still. A few lazy clouds drifted above. Geese were already gathering by the beach, and their tiny claws scampered down from the treetops. "So today's the day, huh?" said Chit-Chat, perched on a branch. "You're going to see so many new things and meet so many new animals, and if there are any squirrels in your wintering grounds, please tell them that Chit-Chat says hello." "Today's the day," said Brightbill. "The flock will be leaving soon." "Are you excited or nervous or scared?" "I'm all those things," the squirrel whispered. "Well, don't worry about your mother. I'll look after her, so you know she'll be perfectly fine." Brightbill smiled. "I'm afraid it's time to go," said Roz as she stepped out of the nest. "Okay, Mama," said the gooseling. "See you in the spring, Chit-Chat." "Have a nice migration, Brightbill." The squirrel scampered back to the treetops. "Come home with lots of exciting stories, but not too exciting because I don't want anything scary to happen to you. Goodbye." The geese were honking with excitement and hustling around as they made their final preparations. Several of the fathers huddled together discussing their flight plans, while the mothers took a head count. "There you are, Brightbill," Loudwing honked from the middle of the crowd. "We are just about to begin." "May I have your attention, please?" said the biggest goose. "As most of you know, my name is Longneck, and I'll be leading this year's migration. I'm asking everyone to please join your families for takeoff. Once we're all airborne, each family will take its position in our V formation, and we'll start the first leg of our journey. Are there any questions?" "I have a question," came a booming voice. "My son will not have a family with him. Where does he fit into the formation?" Everyone turned to Longneck. "He can fly with me," said the big goose. "I hear Brightbill is a very clever flyer. I could use his help at the point." A moment later, the geese began flapping and honking and making their way into the air. A cloud of feathers floated down around the robot and her son. "You are not a gooseling anymore," said Roz. "I am proud of the fine young goose you have become." Brightbill fluttered up to his mother's shoulder. "Thanks, Mama." The young goose wiped his eyes. "Is this where we say goodbye?" "This is where we say goodbye for now. Spring will soon be here, and we will be together again." "I'm going to miss you," said Brightbill as he nuzzled his mother. "I'm going to miss you too," said Roz as she nuzzled her son. The goose took a deep breath. Then he shook his tail feathers, flapped his wings, and joined the flock. At first, the geese flew in a disorganized jumble, but each goose slowly drifted into position until the flock formed a wobbly V. At the lead was Longneck, and behind his left wing was Brightbill. They circled into the sky until the V pointed south. Then the geese began their long migration. Roz climbed to the top of the tree and watched as the flock slowly faded into the horizon. Chapter 54. The winter. The island was quiet. The migratory birds had all left. The hibernators were asleep, and everyone else had begun their simple winter routines. Everyone but Roz. Now that she was alone, our robot didn't know what to do with herself. She stood in her gray garden and watched a sheet of ice slowly form on the pond. Sometimes she could hear good friends of the beavers going about their business beneath the ice, and she wondered when she would see them again. Roz stood there until snowflakes started drifting down from the sky. The flakes swirled in the breeze and slowly piled up on the ground and on the trees and on the robot. So she crouched into her nest, slid the stone door behind her, and sat in darkness. Hours and days and weeks went by without the robot moving. She had no need to move. She felt perfectly safe in the nest, and so, in her own way, the robot hibernated. Roz's body relaxed. Her quiet wiring slowly stopped. Her eyes faded to black. She probably could have spent centuries like that, hibernating in total darkness. But the robot's hibernation was suddenly interrupted when a shaft of sunlight fell upon her face and carried energy back to her empty battery. Roz's body tensed. Her quiet wiring slowly started. Her eyes began to glow. "Hello, I am Rosm, Unit 7134, but you may call me Roz," the robot said automatically. When her systems were all up and running again, Roz noticed that she was surrounded by broken branches and piles of snow. The roof of the nest had caved in, and the lodge was now flooded with sunlight. Roz felt more energized with each passing minute, but she also felt cold. Her joints felt stiff and brittle, and her thinking was slow. So she got up, cleared a spot on the floor, and made a fire. The snow inside the nest began to melt, and the robot's sensors began to thaw. And when she was ready, she climbed out through the hole in the roof and into a bright, foreign landscape. So it's foreign to her, right? Because she'd never seen winter on the island. Everything looks different in the winter. Everything's covered in snow. There's her broken foot. The world Roz had known was now covered in a thick layer of snow. Tree limbs bent to the ground under heavy sleeves. The dark pond was now pure white. The only sounds were Roz's own crunching footsteps. Faint wisps of steam curled up from the robot's body as she trudged through the forest. Roz plunged a hand into a clump of snow and pulled up a long stick. She snapped it in half and flung both pieces back to the nest. She took a few more steps and picked up a fallen tree. She hacked it into smaller pieces and flung them back as well. Then she reached down to another snowy shape, but what she pulled up was not a piece of wood. It was Dart, the weasel. He was frozen solid. Roz stared at his stiff body for a moment, then decided it was best to leave the poor thing where he was. As the robot continued gathering wood, she found more victims of the cold. A frozen mouse, a frozen bird, a frozen deer. Had all the animals frozen to death? No, not all. There were a few fresh tracks in the snow. As we know, the wilderness is filled with beauty, but it is also filled with ugliness. And that winter was ugly. A devastating cold front had swept down from the north and brought dangerous temperatures and huge amounts of snow. The animals had prepared for winter, but nothing could have prepared the weaker ones for those long nights when the temperature plummeted and the wind whipped over the island. Roz returned to the nest where the fire had melted the interior snow to a muddy soup. She took a minute to warm her body by the flames, and then she began the repairs. She patched up the hole in the dome with the latticework of branches before adding a layer of mud and leaves, and soon the repairs were complete. But another snowfall might cave in the nest all over again. So Roz decided to keep a fire going day and night to prevent snow from building on the roof. The robot brought in load after load of firewood, and each time she went outside, she was reminded of the frozen weasel and the mouse and the bird and the deer. How many other frozen animals were hidden beneath the snow? Before going in for the night, she called out to whoever was listening, "Animals of the island, you do not have to freeze. Join me in my lodge where it is safe and warm." Chapter 55. The Lodgers. So we will start on chapter 55 on Thursday, but Roz is so kind and she's keeping this nest warm for these animals who might not otherwise survive. So I'll see you on Thursday to see who the Lodgers will be.